it's Katrina. Metal under the moon. Something very peculiar has recently been discovered on the moon, and it has scientists absolutely baffled. Astronomers at Baylor University uncovered a large mass of something that appears to be metal hiding underneath the largest crater on the lunar surface, called the Aitken Basin. Some scientists say it could be a relic from an asteroid impact millions of years ago, but it could also be something a lot more mysterious. The unexpected mass is about 5 times larger than Hawaii's Big Island, and it's buried a significant distance underground. It didn't originate on the moon, meaning it must have been planted there in the distant past. In fact, it was placed there so long ago that the lunar surface shifted and the giant chunk of metal was buried by moon soil. So far, scientists don't have any solid answers on what the mysterious object could be. Computer simulations of asteroid impacts show that under extreme conditions, the iron-nickel core of an asteroid could have embedded itself in the moon. However, it could also be a dense concentration of oxide material that formed back when the moon was covered in a magma ocean. The Aitken Basin is the largest and deepest crater on any celestial body in our solar system, which is something to keep in mind. It has a diameter of 1,600 miles and is well over 20,000 feet deep. Scientists have no idea what created the crater in the first place. All they know is that there is no larger crater on any of the planets in our solar system or on any of the other moons. It's a huge mystery, made even more confusing by the fact that underneath the crater is a solid chunk of metal. What are your theories? Let me know in the comments. The underground biosphere. You may be surprised to learn that scientists have long proposed that at least a quarter of all living beings on our planet live beneath our feet. Bugs, bacteria, tiny organisms, all of them living in the dirt that we walk on. These tiny and seemingly unimportant beings represent a huge amount of life on the planet. But a new discovery has made the mystery of the underground biosphere much more interesting. The Deep Carbon Observatory now estimates that 70% of all bacteria and single-celled microorganisms live underneath the surface in their own special biosphere. Not just a few inches, though. Scientists believe there is a whole world of microscopic creatures living 5 miles beneath the ground we walk on. Maybe even deeper. It seems impossible, but scientists say it isn't. Even with temperatures of over 251 degrees Fahrenheit, intense gravitational pressure, and zero sunlight, the biosphere still exists. The most shocking part about this discovery is that the number of life forms likely outnumber the living creatures on the surface by a landslide. We only know about them now because of scientists experimenting with boreholes and powerful microscopes. For example, Karen Lloyd from the University of Tennessee recently revealed an organism found roughly 1 mile below the surface that hadn't seen daylight in millions of years. The microscopic monster doesn't require energy from the sun and instead feeds on methane. Some of these creatures even live for thousands of years in stasis, somehow surviving with less energy than we thought was possible for supporting life. Of course, this opens a lot of doors for the possibility of life on other planets, but we would have to dig beneath the surface, which makes it kind of difficult. Do you think there are insects on other planets in our solar system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Mystery Tomb. A very exciting discovery was made deep in the cold wasteland of Russia's Siberia. An ancient burial mound was found containing over 50 bodies and heaps of bronze tools and artifacts. This may sound like any other ordinary discovery of a tomb, but it's far from it. The tomb belonged to an unidentified culture. Scientists have no idea who in the world created the tomb 2,000 years ago. Excavators made the discovery in 2021 when they bulldozed the hill in the city of Krasnoyarsk as part of an expansion project for the local cemetery. The bulldozer accidentally unearthed the tomb, and immediately after, all the work on the project was halted. Archaeologist Dmitry Vinogradov then brought his team of scientists to excavate the site. Although the bulldozer peeled back the top of the mound, damaging a massive portion of the tomb, there was still a lot to investigate. The tomb had timber walls and a carpet made from birch bark. It was built specifically to hold 50 people and contained a wealth of treasure. Archaeologists found everyday objects the ancient people would have wanted to take with them to the afterlife, including mirrors, needles, drinking vessels, symbolic bronze daggers, and their jewelry too, of course. It was likely a family burial site spanning several generations of hunters and gatherers, but they don't seem to have belonged to any group we already know about. They weren't part of the Tagar culture, and they didn't belong to the Ticinian culture either. The burial does seem to have Scythian characteristics, but these people were from their very own culture, one that archaeologists don't even have a name for yet. Angel hair. There is a mysterious substance that people have seen falling from the sky around the world for years. It's called angel hair, and it's typically associated with sightings of UFOs. Although the truth of the substance remains a huge mystery, there is a case from 1959 that you might be interested in hearing about. In the city of Évora, Portugal, a sample of angel hair was supposedly discovered and investigated in a laboratory. Two strange objects were seen flying over the city at about 12 in the afternoon on November 2nd, 1959. Once the mysterious objects vanished from the sky, tiny white filaments were found all across the city, like hair shed from an angel's wings. Professor Joaquim Guedes Gomeral from the Industrial School of Évora witnessed the unbelievable occurrence and wrote everything down in his journal. Because this was such a huge sighting, it's generally considered a real event that happened. A lot of people saw the UFOs and the strange white hairs falling from the sky. A man named Professor Amaral gathered some of the hairs and put them under a microscope. He found that they were tiny microscopic creatures with tentacles preserved inside of a gelatinous goo. They looked a lot like sea anemones, only so tiny they couldn't be seen without magnification. But just like all the other sightings of angel hair, the substance quickly vanished. It appears to have been some kind of discharge from the UFOs. But because it always disappears, there is no way to confirm that any of it even happened. What do you think? Have you heard about these white filaments before? Let me know in the comments. Big shout out to Berenice Sternot and Jay Hilliard1. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. Lost World. There was once an explorer by the name of Alfred Isaac Middleton, and he was a British zoological expert with a fascination for all things botanical and archaeological. In the 19th century, Alfred set out on several expeditions looking for lost worlds and forgotten civilizations. He traveled through the Amazon rainforest and visited Southeast Asia. He also trekked through hot and inhospitable parts of Africa. During his travels, he supposedly came across a lost city that has never again been found. The lost city of Dalitu is said to be hidden somewhere in the jungles of Sumatra. Legends say this city was one of the most advanced places on the planet, with towering buildings, complex city planning, a progressive social structure, and weirdly sophisticated technology. They had buildings that looked like flying saucers, and they seemed to know an awful lot about the stars. And yet they were also very tribal and primitive in nature, lacking modern clothing or even modern amenities. Some accounts even say they were mutants and looked like strange hybrids of humans and monkeys. Nobody knows what became of the Lost Kingdom. That is, if it ever even existed in the first place. Based on the descriptions of Dalitu, some researchers believe it was a city of failed genetic experiments carried out by visitors from outer space. But unfortunately, this is all speculation until the actual city is discovered once again. The Tury Geoglyphs. In northern Kazakhstan, there is a collection of mysterious earthworks that date back 8,000 years. They are called the Tury Geoglyphs, and they are over 6,000 years older than the much more famous Nazca lines in Peru. The discovery came in 2007 when Dimitri Day uncovered strange shapes carved into the earth on Google Maps. Dimitri was a huge archaeology enthusiast, so he launched an expedition of his own to see what was hiding in the northern steppes. His would be the first, but there would be at least 80 other expeditions as scientists desperately scrambled to figure out the mystery. There have been 127 giant structures found in the region. Some of them are shaped like huge squares, some are circles, and others oddly resemble swastikas. Keep in mind, these swastika patterns have nothing to do with the Nazis, who came long after the geoglyphs were made. It used to be a peaceful symbol, and it was used in many different religions and cults. One of the most impressive patterns was dubbed Uchisar Square by researchers. It consists of 101 earthen mounds and covers an area of 11 football fields, about 1,000 meters. It's just a huge square that seems to serve absolutely no purpose. But of course, all these geoglyphs must have been created for a reason. They are so old that they were likely built by primitive hunters and gatherers. They appear to be observatories or perhaps ancient calendars used in the Neolithic period. Some experts have even guessed they could have been used as places of cultic worship. It's all a huge mystery, and nobody seems any closer to solving it today than they were back in 2007. The first dinosaur. Scientists have never been able to identify the missing link between monkeys and humans. And similarly, they've never been able to find the original dinosaur either. It's a massive mystery in the history of our planet, but scientists do have some clues. The oldest recorded dinosaur ever discovered is the Nyasasaurus parringtoni. It predates every other dinosaur by about 10 million years. And although it likely wasn't the first dinosaur to evolve, it very well could have been a relative of the earliest dinosaur. It was first found by paleontologist Alan J. Charing in the 1950s. But it wasn't until 2013 when the dinosaur was formally described using modern techniques. It lived in the Middle Triassic era, which was around 243 million years ago. That's approximately 12 million years older than the next oldest dinosaurs, which were found in Brazil. The Nyasasaurus was uncovered in Tanzania, Africa, in the Ruhuhu Basin near Lake Nyasa. And while the Nyasasaurus was an amazing discovery, it doesn't quite answer the question: where did dinosaurs come from? Scientists believe they evolved in the same area that humans evolved. The Nyasasaurus likely originated in the southern part of Pangaea, the supercontinent that once contained India, Australia, Antarctica, Africa, Madagascar, and South America, specifically in the region of Tanzania. Scientists are fairly certain that humans and dinosaurs both evolved in Africa, though unfortunately the exact details are still unknown. Aliens in the sewer. Strange creatures are supposedly lurking in our sewers. Sanitation workers in Raleigh, North Carolina used a remote-controlled camera to look down a sewer tunnel because something was clogging it, and they needed to see what it was. But instead of a large chunk of debris, they found a horrifying creature. There was a fleshy blob stuck to the walls of the tunnel, unlike anything the workers had ever seen before. Additional exploration revealed even more growths stuck to the sewage tunnels, looking like hairy tumors. After making the shocking discovery, there were several weeks of confusion among the city workers. But finally, a marine biologist came forward to identify the creepy alien creatures as tubifex worms. Turns out that thousands of these worms had bonded together to create huge, sloppy blobs of life. Biologists say it's a phenomenon that happens when worms can't reach soil. They clump together to create a throbbing organism, like something you might expect to find stuck to the side of a spaceship. Turkey's abandoned town. The creepy town of Kayaköy in Turkey is one of the most mysterious abandoned villages in the country. The place has been deserted since 1923 and is rarely even visited by curious tourists. There are hundreds of stone houses here that are slowly being eroded by the hot, beating sun. But 600 years ago, the city was flourishing. It was founded around the 14th century and grew to hold a population of about 10,000 people. There was a mix of many different kinds of religions, all living in harmony. There were Muslims from Anatolia and Orthodox Christians from Greece. This was a pretty big deal in the early 1900s, when these two religions weren't exactly getting along, never mind living in such close proximity to one another. Then came the Greco-Turkish War of 1919. The only way to settle the war was for Greece and Turkey to each claim one major religion and thereby ship those of the opposing religion to the other country. Muslims were shipped from Greece to Turkey, and Christians packed up their bags and went to Greece. The result left Kayaköy nearly abandoned overnight. a total of 6,000 people left their homes and churches and sought out a new life in Greece. After a majority of Kaiakoi's residents moved away, the rest of the village's inhabitants packed up and left too. They abandoned their small stone houses perched on the side of the hill and never looked back. The place is now a ghost town, shattered by the earthquake of 1957 that left the houses in ruins. And some even say its lost streets are haunted. St. Patrick's Bell. St. Patrick is the most revered saint in all of Ireland, but he was born in Britain. Not much of his life has ever been confirmed, and most of what you've heard of him likely came from rumors and fairy tales that have been spread over the past 1,500 years. Scholars believe he lived in the 5th century AD. He was born to a deacon and was kidnapped by pirates as a teenager. We know he worked as a shepherd during his enslavement in Ireland, and then he found God before escaping back to Britain. St. Patrick received a vision shortly after his return to Britain telling him to convert the people of Ireland to Christianity. And so, that's exactly what he did. He became the most important missionary in Irish history. Almost a century after his death, 3 relics were removed from his tomb: an iron bell, a goblet, and a gospel. But I'll tell you about the bell. Legend has it that whenever St. Patrick created a new Christian community, he gave them a special bell that they could use during religious ceremonies. St. Patrick had his very own bell, which was buried with him and then removed 60 years after his death. It was given to the Mulholland family to keep safe, but then the last family member died in the 18th century. The bell then changed hands several times before being purchased by the Royal Irish Academy. It's still on display today in the Treasury Room at the National Museum of Ireland. The only real mystery is that nobody has ever been able to say for sure if St. Patrick really used the bell. Apparently, there were hundreds of these bells made in the 5th century, meaning it could have belonged to anyone. The London Hammer. In 1936, at Red Creek outside London, Texas, Max Hann and his wife Emma found a strange piece of limestone that seemed to have wood sticking out of it. They brought the stone home with them and used it as a weird paperweight. Then, in 1946, their son, for some reason, broke open the stone, and what he found amazed him. Contained within the limestone was a man-made hammer. The head of the hammer is about 6 inches long, and it has a diameter of about 1 inch. It was probably intended for fine work. The hammerhead itself was tested and was shown to be made up of 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur, indicating that it was the product of a blacksmith's forge. The hammerhead has not rusted at all since it was freed from the rock. It's the same as American tools manufactured in the same area in the late 1800s. The rock that it was in, Ordovician limestone, probably formed some 400 million years ago. So how did a late 1800s American hammer end up in a chunk of Ordovician rock? People have proposed it as proof of time travel, but not exactly. Limestone is very soluble, and the area of Texas where it was found is subject to flash floods and occasional torrential downpours. The limestone had probably been caught in a wet event like this and had formed a solution, and some hapless carpenter dropped his hammer into the puddle. As the puddle dried, the limestone formed what's called a concretion, encasing the hammer as the rock re-solidified. It's a known geological process and not really a mystery at all. As far as science is concerned, known geological processes can easily explain how this came to be, even though you have to admit it is pretty rare. But people believe what they want to believe, and the hammer was purchased by creationist Carl Bow in 1983. He put it into his Creation Evidence Museum, where he claims it as outstanding proof of the biblical flood story. Visitors can bring home a replica of the hammer from the museum gift shop, which you have to admit would be a great conversation starter. The Badlands Guardian. In southeastern Alberta, Canada, is a geological feature that when viewed from above looks like something very interesting. Known as the Badlands Guardian, it looks just like a human wearing an indigenous type of headdress. It is huge, even bigger than the faces on Mount Rushmore. Because of the remarkable detail, many people have proposed it might have been created by an ancient civilization or an indigenous culture. Additional man-made structures make it look like the figure is now wearing earphones, but that is a road and an oil well that was installed more recently. The thing is, no archaeological evidence has been found near the area. Geologists say that this hasn't been carved by human hands at all. Instead, the formation is a result of rainwater eroding the clay-rich soil of the region, creating numerous patterns across the landscape. The Badlands Guardian has been named one of the top discoveries made by Google Earth. What do you think? Ancient monument or geological? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Desert Atlantis. There are lots of legendary cities that have been lost to time, but recently one was found which has been affectionately called the Atlantis of the Sands. For a long time, the only mention of the city, called Iram of the Pillars, was in the Quran, where it was said to be full of vibrant and tall buildings that were home to the people of Ad. At the end of the story, which saw the people being punished by Allah, the city was buried beneath the sand, never to be seen again. That was until the mid-90s, when a team of researchers used data collected by NASA satellites, radar, and images from the Challenger shuttle and found the lost city of Ubar. They claim it is the same city as Iram of the Pillars. The images help them to identify ancient camel trade routes and a large octagonal fort. Descriptions of this city in the Quran are very similar to the remains that have been found here. So, is it the actual city? Or perhaps the city in the Quran was based upon the real-life Ubar? No one knows for sure, but it's a discovery that has helped learn a lot about the way that ancient civilizations in the region used to live.
Ani ruins. The mysterious ruins of Ani are a sight to behold in the country of Armenia. The ruins can be found on a secluded plateau overlooking a raging river, which forms the border between Armenia and Turkey. It's a ghost town, quite literally in the middle of nowhere. There is not a single town to be found nearby, and the valleys and mountains are totally undeveloped. It's one of the last great untouched landscapes, and that's what makes the ruins so incredible. Plus, it's extremely cold in the winter, and the ruins are typically covered in snow. This makes them even more magical than they would be otherwise. The ruins include one massive cathedral, 6 smaller and broken churches, and fields of shattered stone that once formed the walls of buildings. The city of Ani flourished in the 10th century as the capital of the Armenian kingdom. It actually controlled one of the biggest and most profitable sections of the Silk Road. However, the Mongol invasion in 1319 caused the city to lose its power. It was razed to the ground, and then it was broken even further by an intense earthquake. Ani was practically deserted, and the few people who remained found themselves absorbed into the Ottoman Empire in 1579. By 1735, the whole place was abandoned. Now the ruins sit quietly in nature, frozen in ice during the colder months. Glacier House. In the year 1886, the Rogers Pass section of the Canadian Pacific Railway's Trans-Canada Line opened for business. This was an incredibly dangerous part of the trail, with the train having to climb a steep grade through an area prone to avalanches. Nonetheless, the railway opened and it was a big success. In that same year, Glacier National Park was created by the government. A new vacation lodge was built at Rogers Pass inside the Glacier National Park, within reach of the railway. It was called Glacier House, and it was Canada's very first luxury mountain hotel. The Glacier House was a big success because everyone wanted to go up into the mountains. The Rocky Mountains here are some of the biggest and most impressive on the planet, and guides from Switzerland came down to work at the lodge and take people up the ice. But sadly, on March 4th, 1910, an unbelievably big avalanche killed 58 people in Rogers Pass. The Canadian Railway then decided they were going to build a bypass tunnel instead of going over Rogers Pass, and the railway line was abandoned by 1916. This left the Glacier House inaccessible until 1963, when the Trans-Canada Highway opened. Glacier House had already gone out of business. It's now a decrepit old ruin hiding way up in the mountains. Artifacts and melting glaciers. About 3,000 years ago, somebody was walking through the Jotunheimen Mountains when they lost a shoe. Whoever owned it probably didn't think they were ever going to get it back, and although they never found it again, archaeologists recovered it 3 millennia later in 2007. The shoe was discovered totally intact, frozen high up in the Norwegian mountains. That's not the only strange thing to have been discovered in a melting glacier in Norway. About 4,000 years ago, a red-winged thrush, a small bird, died in the mountain range and was immediately buried under ice and snow. When it emerged again just a couple of years ago, scientists found that its internal organs were still intact. Hundreds of these discoveries have been made in the last few years, and it's all because of melting ice patches. Norway's glaciers have revealed the remains of dead animals, the remnants of human activities, and even horse tracks frozen in the permafrost. According to Brigitte Skar, an associate professor at the NTNU University Museum, not a single year goes by without a surprising find. She says that based on satellite images from 2020, nearly 40% of the ice has melted, revealing all kinds of ancient history from the days of the Vikings and beyond. The oldest of all the finds is 6,100 years old. This artifact is an arrow shaft found at the same site as the shoe. It belonged to prehistoric people living in the world's most northerly reaches in the miserable cold. Mummified woolly mammoth. In Canada, a gold miner discovered a mummified woolly mammoth. It just happened in 2022 and is currently the most amazing woolly mammoth discovery in history. The young miner was digging through the permafrost near Eureka Creek, way up in the Canadian North, when he struck something unexpected. He got out of his truck to see what had happened, and that was when he found himself staring into the eyes of a baby woolly mammoth. It had been stuck in the ice for 35,000 years and was almost perfectly preserved. The Egyptians couldn't have done a better job at mummifying the baby elephant. According to paleontologist Grant Zazula, she is perfect and beautiful, and the most incredible Ice Age animal ever found. The woolly mammoth has most of her skin and hair still intact. She has her trunk and her tail, her floppy little baby ears, and even the prehensile end of her trunk, the part that was used to grab grass. It's such a miraculous discovery that it's hard to stop talking about it, as officials have even called the mammoth the most important paleontological discovery in North America. The woolly mammoth baby was little over a month old when she died, though no cause of death has been determined. That being said, researchers did discover a small piece of grass in her stomach. This suggests that her final moments had been spent grazing in the wild. We don't know if she was killed by a cave lion, a giant steppe bison, or even pummeled by a wild horse. Whatever happened, she got stuck under the ice almost immediately, and her body never decayed. The cover-up on Everest. A man named Mark Sinnott has made some pretty wild assertions regarding China and Mount Everest. Mark is an experienced climber, and his assertions revolve around the two British climbers George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. In 1924, George and Andrew tried to climb the north face of Mount Everest and went missing. They weren't seen again until Mallory's body was discovered 2,000 feet from the summit back in 1999, totally frozen over by the ice. Here's where things get spooky. Andrew's body was never found, and neither was the camera that the pair were carrying. The camera is important because it could have made all the difference to whether or not these two adventurers made it all the way to the top of Everest or not. Either they missed the peak by 800 feet and died in the snow, or they got to the top and died coming down. Nobody knows, but the film on the camera would probably prove it one way or the other. Mark has suggested that Andrew's body was indeed found by Chinese climbers, then disposed of, and the film destroyed. It's a pretty outrageous claim, though Mark says he has inside sources at the China-Tibet Mountaineering Association. If true, it would mean that George and Andrew were the very first people to reach the summit of Mount Everest 29 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, and the first to climb the North Face before a group of Chinese climbers did so in 1960. And now for number 5. But first, it's shout-out time! Big thank you to Nikki Thrailkill and Carrie Aubrey for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you! Dinosaurs in Antarctica. A team of scientists recently discovered over a ton of fossils in Antarctica, one of the coldest places in the world. When I say a ton of fossils, I'm not talking metaphorically, I mean an actual ton of dinosaur remains. 12 scientists from all over the world, including from the US and South Africa, made the discovery on James Ross Island. This is located at the very edge of the Antarctic Peninsula. They discovered bones from plesiosaurs and mosasaurs. These were marine lizards that lived millions of years ago at a time when Antarctica was completely covered in water. While the gigantic marine beasts were the main success of the mission, there were plenty of other fossils found. The researchers even discovered fossilized birds, specifically fossilized prehistoric ducks from the Cretaceous period. Uchisar Castle. Uchisar Castle in Cappadocia, Turkey can be found at an astounding elevation of 4,170 feet. That's high enough that part of the year, this ancient castle is covered in heavy snow and looks like something out of a fantasy movie or a fairy tale. Uchisar is a town that came into being as early as the days of the Hittites, 3,000 years ago. However, there is no record of the town existing until the 14th century. It's believed the Hittites used the cold caves high up in the mountains to hide from possible attacks. Then, the Byzantines used the chilly mountains as a buffer zone during the 7th century to try and ward off Islamic expansion. It didn't work, and the Islamists eventually took over the town and the castle. From a purely optical perspective, Uchisar is one of the most exotic-looking places on the planet. It looks like a city in the sky, with the rock castle towering over the valley city below, and the whole thing almost floating above the clouds. The castle is hardly what it used to be, as the caves and passages carved into the rock have partly melted or collapsed. It looks more like a sinking anthill than anything else. But still, it is a castle mountain, a castle that was carved from the top of this great and snowy peak to watch over the lands below. A cold massacre. 1,500 years ago on the Swedish island of Öland, something terrible happened. This island is located a few miles off the coast of Sweden and is about as cold as it gets in Europe, with icy northern winds that make living here like living on the edge of a tornado. It was a brutal existence hundreds of years ago, not only because of the harsh weather, but because you never knew when you were going to be murdered. 1,500 years ago, there was a massacre. Evidence of it has been found at the site of Sandbyborg, currently a flat ruin with the remains of old stone sheep walls where the high ramparts used to be. The sheep walls were actually built using stones taken from the original fortress that stood in the same spot. The original structure was built in the year 400 and was about the size of a football field. There are roughly a dozen such remains on the island, left over from the migration period around the time of the Roman Empire's collapse. This was a rough time. People were fleeing Europe in all directions, were almost always under siege, and the people of Sandbyborg just wanted to live in their fortress and be left alone. Unfortunately, somebody broke through the walls, murdered everyone inside their homes, and left them dead on the floor. The place was then abandoned and left alone for years. The turf walls of the houses eventually collapsed, and the whole place turned into a shallow grave. Helena Victor from the Kalmar County Museum has called it a unique site because the attack was sudden and the settlement was never repopulated. Even though the others on the island would have known what happened, nobody entered the structure to bury the dead or even pillage what was left. It's a huge cold case, and nobody's sure who killed these people or why others on the island were too scared to bury the dead. 30 years of Otzi. The most famous mummy in Europe was discovered high up in the Alps 30 years ago. He is 5,000 years old and is really the only actual caveman who's ever been discovered in a block of ice. It's like something from a cartoon, except very real. He was discovered lying in the ice at the edge of a lake 2 miles above sea level in the Alps bordering Austria and Italy. He was preserved thanks to the high altitude, lack of oxygen, freezing winds, and sub-zero temperatures. So just how much information have we learned about this person over the past 3 decades since he was brought down from the mountain? He's being kept by researchers at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Italy. Professionals have his body kept in a cold chamber maintained at approximately -21.2 degrees Fahrenheit. 5 times a year, his body is sprayed with sterile water to make sure he stays wet and cold. Oliver Pascal, the researcher in charge of the Iceman's conservation, has called him the most investigated human body in the world. So here are some facts we know about the world's only Iceman. He was pretty short, only about 5'2", and he was 46 when he died. He was left-handed, which might be the weirdest thing of all. He also wore a size 8 shoes. His eyes were brown, his hair was brown, and he had the classic tanned Mediterranean skin tone. Otzi had type O blood, was intolerant to lactose, and was missing his 12th pair of ribs. He also had some cavities in his teeth, suffered from Lyme disease, had rough shoulders, hips, knees, and a bad back. And he had 61 tattoos. 5,200 years ago, it looks like tattoos were all the rage because Otzi's entire body was basically covered in ink. The cold graves of warrior women. Archaeologists unearthed the graves of ancient Amazonian warrior women in the frozen tundra of Russia. The graves were found in the west, belonging to 4 Scythian warriors who ranged in age from between their teenage years to their late 40s. The women were buried with all the appropriate warriors' tools of the day, from spears to arrowheads, and even equipment for riding horses. The oldest woman was found still wearing a golden headdress known as a calathus. It's believed by almost every scholar and historian that the Scythians were a powerful tribe of warriors who trained both boys and girls to grow up as fighters. They were basically like the Spartans of the eastern steppes, nomads who lived throughout Russia and Kazakhstan in the cold and snowy hills. They were almost definitely the inspiration behind the Greek myth of Amazonia, the land of the warrior women. And they were the inspiration behind the modern comic book hero Wonder Woman. This has been the first time that direct evidence has been found of multiple generations of warrior women buried together. Researchers think that they all trained as young girls, and that the women may have been sisters or mothers and daughters. Sea monsters in the desert. Far from the royal burial zone at Saqqara in Egypt, a team of scientists uncovered the remains of a gigantic creature. It happened back in 2019, and the scientists weren't at all interested in mummies or buried tombs. They were looking for monsters from a bygone age, and they found them. This monster in the desert lived at a time when Egypt was not a desert at all, as confusing as that may sound. 40 million years ago, this massive marine creature was gliding effortlessly through clean, plastic-free water when Egypt was a shallow marine environment. And even though the beast was so big, it was likely a gentle giant. I'm talking about a prehistoric sea cow called Sirenia, an extinct relative of the manatee. Paleontologists from Cairo University say the ribs and limb bones of a fully grown specimen were found there. This thing would have been like the ancient sea version of a cow for its docile nature and herbivorous appetite. These days, there are 4 living species of manatee spread all the way from the Amazon to West Africa. But the prehistoric version was quite a bit different. It was actually semi-aquatic and still had front and hind limbs 50 million years ago. It took about 10 million years for it to shed its limbs and replace them with fins. And shortly after that, the water began to drain away. The ocean was almost definitely replaced by a forest, which was later replaced by a shrubland or grassland, and then finally a desert. All these years later, the ancient manatee's bones were still lying there on the ground. Cemetery of Flying Reptiles. Scientists in Chile have discovered a very rare cemetery in the middle of the Atacama Desert. The graveyard is filled with the amazingly preserved bones of ancient flying reptiles, which lived over 100 million years ago. By flying reptiles, I mean pterosaurs, the biggest and baddest flying creatures of the dinosaur age. They were a sort of gigantic, terrifying flamingo. Pterosaurs apparently fed by filtering water through their thin teeth, just like how flamingos feed today. But what were all these skeletons doing in the middle of the desert? The Atacama region may be a desolate, scorching wasteland these days, but it was once a much different landscape. There were more animals, there was water, and it wasn't such a lifeless place. Flying reptiles would have had an abundance of food to pick from. These skeletons were found in 2 main cemeteries where there appears to have been some kind of mass death event. According to the lead scientist on the expedition, Jonathan Alarcón, he had been searching for these exact dinosaur remains for years. The discovery of these graveyards was like a revelation. one which surpassed even his greatest hopes. The scientists dug up mostly flat and broken bones, skeletons that had been pummeled by the passing of time, but they also found three-dimensional bones, hidden unsuspectingly in the desert hills under a thin layer of crystallized rock. Mysterious Oasis. In 2014, an oasis appeared in the Tunisian desert. It was quite the sight for the desert locals who couldn't believe their eyes. In the middle of an otherwise barren stretch of sand, there was a shimmering blue lake as if it had been sent from heaven above. Nobody in the region knew where it came from, but they didn't care. Hundreds of locals swarmed the unexpected oasis and started swimming. It was originally discovered first by a couple of shepherds wandering through the wasteland, and since the temperature was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it quickly became a hit with the locals. But you can't trust everything you find in the desert. There were some serious concerns that this random lake of seemingly crystal water was polluted by the local phosphate mining industry. It was believed that carcinogenic materials had seeped into the water. In the end, nobody died, and we never did get an explanation for how a lake appeared overnight in the desert. Scientists say it may have been groundwater released by seismic activity, pushed up to the surface. However, we don't know for sure. Tombos. Tombos is a curious archaeological site in the desert near the Nile River in northern Sudan. It consists of circular mounds of rock that look like ordinary formations amongst the desert landscape. But in reality, Tombos is an ancient underground burial site. The tombs were carved out of the ground around the year 2500 BC. They were made by the native inhabitants of Nubia, ancient Egypt's lesser-known neighbor to the south. Unfortunately, the deeper history of Africa is usually eclipsed by the rise of Egypt. The global fascination with Egyptian pyramids and mummies has drowned out the rest of the old societies in the region. There were many different civilizations that rose at the same time along the Nile River Valley and wielded major power. One of these was the Kingdom of Kush, but the Egyptians didn't really like having a powerful neighbor to the south, and so they frequently went to war. Tombos was actually an Egyptian colonial site during the New Kingdom. The Egyptians were trying to get a foothold in Nubia to carve a small chunk of it out for themselves by slowly spreading their people into the land around 1200 BC. While it worked briefly, they would ultimately lose control of the region. However, just by having a small colonial site here, the Egyptians left a cultural mark. The tombs at Tombos were done in typical Egyptian fashion, and pyramids even once stood in the area as smaller copies of the Great Pyramids farther north. Biting superbugs. The Gobi Desert meets the Tibetan Plateau in northern China to create one of the most surreal landscapes in the world. Vast sand dunes, mountains of jagged rock, and countless miles of nothing. The temperatures can sink well below freezing in the winter, and in the summer and the blistering sun, it can be hot enough to melt your skin. It's here in this desert region where scientists are hunting for organisms that they hope to use medicinally. These desert organisms may just be helping scientists to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, thereby saving roughly 1 million lives a year. This remote desert holds the key to new antibiotics which bacteria has yet to develop a resistance to. One of the scientists participating in the hunt is Paul Dyson from Swansea University Medical School. Paul and his team have already discovered one species of bacteria that could change medicine for good. In 2013, the scientists managed to isolate a previously unknown type of Streptomyces bacteria in the Gobi Desert. They sequenced the bacterium's genome and found it to be a kind of superspecies, producing antibiotics to kill other bacteria and growing much faster than normal. This is the kind of bacteria which could be used in RNA vaccines. Fun fact, Streptomyces is also what gives soil its earthy dirt smell. It takes a lot of testing to get from bacteria to vaccine, as we can tell by just how old the discovery is. But it's pretty fascinating to think that lying in a big chunk of sand somewhere could be the cure to the next pandemic. Comet glass. A discovery of mysterious glass takes us back to Chile's Atacama Desert. Not far from where scientists recently discovered a graveyard of prehistoric flying lizards, scientists discovered bits of twisted glass thrown across the surface of the sand. They believe this mysterious glass in the desert came from a massive comet that exploded in the Earth's atmosphere. The catastrophic event happened about 12,000 years ago. The force of the explosion would have produced intense tornado winds and such unimaginable heat that the desert sand was scorched. The sand was heated to temperatures so hot that it was transformed as if by magic into silicate glass. The discovery of this glass was made about 10 years ago, but it wasn't until recently that scientists realized what it was. At first, they had been stumped by the chunks of dark green and black glass found across a 47-mile stretch of desert. Some of these chunks of glass were about the size of a pizza box. Some researchers thought the sand had been turned into glass from grass fires, while some thought fireballs in the atmosphere. Nobody wanted to believe that a comet could have caused such an explosion. Not until the evidence was indisputable. This would have been like a nuclear bomb going off. The heat so intense that if a city had been here, everyone in it would have most likely been vaporized. A lost civilization. In the United Arab Emirates, scientists have discovered the leftover traces of an ancient civilization that once lived in the desert. Scientists say the mysterious civilization prospered here 12,000 years ago. At the same time, an explosion was turning sand to glass in South America. The scientists made this discovery using the newest technology available to them at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi. They used satellite remote sensing observations to look at the remnants of objects buried under the earth. They concentrated on the area surrounding already known archaeological sites. Basically, they figured that the society would have built their stuff close together, and they were 100% correct. One of the biggest discoveries was made near the archaeological site of Saruq al-Hadid, which was found back in 2002. It's deep in the desert at the southern borders of the Dubai Emirate and was used as a metal-producing factory in the Iron Age. It likely functioned between 1300 and 800 BC. Although scientists have found treasures from the Stone Age 9,000 years before the metal factory, it was likely the Iron Age where the culture peaked. Now we have even more sites in the surrounding desert. It looks like there was really a massive civilization spread all across the UAE, and yet nobody knows who they were. They could obviously make tools, they practiced advanced industrial manufacturing, and almost all their greatest achievements have since been swallowed by the merciless desert. The biggest diamond. Miners in the Angolan desert have just discovered something beyond precious. According to the Lucapa Diamond Company, they have mined the largest pink diamond found in 300 years. That makes it one of the biggest diamonds of all time, an extraordinarily rare 170-carat pure chunk of diamond. The Australian mining company has named the precious gem the Lula Rosa. It was found in the northeastern region of Angola, where life is scarce and the environment is harsh, but diamonds are plentiful. It's a Type 2A diamond, which is one of the rarest and purest of all naturally developed stones. It was such a historic find that even the Angolan government shared the exciting news. And although we don't actually know the market value of the pink diamond just yet, it's already being set up for sale. Judging on its size, comparable to a baseball, and previous sales like the 2017 Pink Star diamond that sold for over $7 million, it will most likely fetch a small fortune. The Roswell Anniversary. July 8, 2022 was the 75th anniversary of one of the biggest mysteries to ever come out of a desert. 75 years ago, a spaceship may or may not have been found crash-landed in the shrub-spotted wastes of New Mexico. It was on July 8, 1947 that the story appeared in the Roswell Daily Record. The caption was, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." And although the newspaper didn't offer enough specifics to paint a clear picture of what happened, the nation was intrigued. It was implied that a ship piloted by extraterrestrials had just landed in America. The news report said that the 509th Bombardment Group at the Roswell Army Airfield retrieved the mysterious instrument and then took it to their headquarters. A day after the first story, there was a follow-up stating that the object was nothing but a high-altitude weather balloon, and that they had been mistaken about the flying saucer. Even though the case seemed to be open and shut in just 24 hours, we are still talking about it all these years later. What we know is that some kind of wreckage was discovered by a rancher named Mac Brazel on his property. The entire region was undergoing a wave of mysterious sightings. People had been seeing flying saucers nearly every night. Pilot Kenneth Arnold even reported seeing strange flying objects as he piloted over Mount Rainier in Washington state. MacBrazel contacted the authorities about the wreckage he had discovered on his property, and this led to the July 8th news story. But whether these scraps of metal found really belonged to a weather balloon or a flying saucer, we still don't know. California stone circles. To this very day, archaeologists are baffled by a group of mysterious circle-shaped earthworks in the southern California desert. The ancient earthworks can be found in the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, and they have been there for at least 3,000 years. The earthworks aren't that large, made up of simple stone circles just big enough for someone to lay down inside of them. And even though they've been studied repeatedly, scientists still can't agree on what they were used for. Some have suggested they could have had something to do with cooking, maybe shelter, or even ceremonial activity. Another interesting theory is that these stone circles were left behind by travelers many thousands of years before Europeans ever arrived in North America. They may have been used as temporary shelters, primitive rock huts where the travelers could seek a reprieve from the sun. If they were temporary shelters, they may have been used by a migrating group of early humans trying to find the best place to settle. But at the end of the day, it's all just speculation. Archaeologists haven't found any artifacts linked to the stone circles. They don't know who built them, and they're not even entirely sure of the age. These circles are definitely at least 3,000 years old, but could date as far back as 10,000 years.
The Lost City of the Desert. In 1944, a pilot with the Royal Air Force embarked upon a journey from Salalah in Oman to Muscat, but he lost his way. Instead of flying due east for 2 hours, he flew north and found himself in the middle of nowhere. He became lost in the seemingly endless Arabian desert, only by a miracle finding the Arabian Gulf and landing just before he ran out of fuel. When the pilot returned to civilization, he had an exciting story to tell. Not only did he nearly lose his life because he lost his bearings, but he also discovered something strange out in the desert. From his vantage high in the sky, he witnessed what looked like a small town in the middle of these shifting sands. He described fort-like structures, what could have been castles, and crumbling houses. Yet he didn't see any people there, suggesting the city was deserted. The pilot's story sparked an age of exploration into what's called the Empty Quarter. It became clear to explorers that a lost city was waiting to be found. Every eager adventurer with enough money to do so began hunting for it, but nobody ever found it. 80 years later, we still haven't found it. No one knows if there is really a city out in the desert, if it was an elaborate hoax, or if the pilot hallucinated the whole thing. Petra and the Sun God. The ancient city of Petra in southern Jordan may have been built for the god of the sun. Petra was carved out of solid stone by the ancient Nabateans 2,300 years ago. But not many people know the detailed history of the place. The truth is that almost nothing is known about the Nabateans or their traditions. Professor Megan Perry from East Carolina University says nobody truly understands the significance of these structures in Petra. You'll be shocked to learn only 85% of the area has been excavated, and almost no written records were ever found. The Nabateans are a huge mystery. What archaeologists have guessed is that they controlled the spice trade moving through the region, but then were conquered by the Romans and sent into the desert to go extinct. Juan Antonio Belmonte from the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands has a theory. He believes one of Petra's most famous attractions, the monastery, was built in honor of a mysterious sun deity nobody knows about. He noted that the gate of the structure is perfectly illuminated by the setting sun. The sun shines straight through the gateway to create a dazzling effect, though only for a week before and after the winter solstice. The mysterious structure may have been a temple from which the Nabateans worshipped an unknown sun god. Unfortunately, it's all just speculation right now. We don't know why the structures of Petra were built, if there are tombs hiding underground, or if the connection to the sun is just a coincidence. The Serpent Mound. Serpent Mound is one of the most controversial archaeological sites in the United States of America. From ground level, you wouldn't even know you were standing on a historical site. It's only from above that you see the obvious shape of a serpent winding through the hills. The mound was made by early Native Americans over 2,000 years ago, but there has been a hot debate in the US over which tribe built the structure and when exactly it happened. Not to mention, nobody's even sure what the purpose of the serpent-shaped mound was. The mound was excavated by Frederick Ward Putnam, who found artifacts and lost villages nearby that he said belonged to the Adena or Fort Ancient cultures. But then, in the 1990s, archaeologists dated Serpent Mound at only about 900 years old. Then, more recently, scientists dated charcoal pieces found in the soil, which yielded a much older date of around 400 BC, or 2,400 years ago. If it really is this ancient, the mound was built by the Adena. But if it's only 900 years old, it was more likely built by the Fort Ancient culture. But scientists can't agree. Surprise, surprise. Then there is the mystery of what Serpent Mound meant to the Native Americans who built it. Some experts in ancient history say it was based on the plumed serpent, a dragon-like figure from Mesoamerican cultures. The plumed serpent was worshipped by the Aztec and the Maya, and is even depicted in ancient Maya artwork. The pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza was supposedly a center of cult worship for the plumed serpent. At the end of the day, it's still a huge mystery. The most likely explanation is that a group of people who worshipped the plumed serpent migrated all the way from Maya territory into Ohio. Then they made a tribute to the Great Dragon. Big thank you to J Hilliard1 and NightGuy34 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about mysterious ancient places. Hunter-gatherers in England. Archaeologists from the University of Chester just discovered an ancient settlement used by primitive hunter-gatherers in the Stone Age. The mysterious site was uncovered during excavations near Scarborough, England. The settlement once stood on the shore of an island in the center of an ancient lake, a lake that no longer exists. Over the last few thousand years, the lake dried up and was buried under thick deposits of peat. The good thing about peat is that it helps to preserve everything. Excavations revealed artifacts, leftover scraps of animals, and even weapons made from bone and antler. A closer inspection of the animal bones revealed the hunters preferred elk, red deer, and beavers. What's really interesting is that many of the weapons used to hunt these animals were buried in a ceremonial manner, suggesting the prehistoric people of England viewed the animals they hunted as sacred. Hunting and butchering was likely serious business. Dr. Amy Gray Jones says they even took the time to decorate their weapons and other objects, suggesting they weren't exactly on the edge of starvation. After all, they had time to do artwork. This fascinating settlement was occupied 10,500 years ago. It really has been an amazing discovery because it shows that hunter-gatherers weren't just barbarians chasing the next meal. They decorated their personal objects just like we do today. They participated in mysterious hunting rituals and spent long periods in settlements when they found a place they liked. Olduvai Gorge. In Tanzania, Olduvai Gorge contains the earliest evidence of our own ancestors. Anthropologists have found hundreds of fossilized bones here dating back over millions of years. It's thanks to this mysterious gorge that scientists are fairly certain humans, as we are today, evolved in Africa. The gorge can be found in the Great Rift Valley, not far from the Serengeti National Park. It formed naturally 30,000 years ago as the result of geological activity. Lewis and Mary Leakey are attributed with making the first major discoveries here in the 1930s. They found stone tools and fossils of a long-extinct primate from 25 million years ago. In the 1950s, they found even more evidence of early life. Mary uncovered the fossil of a skull and some teeth from a hominin that had never been identified. Over the next weeks, she and Lewis uncovered 400 pieces of an almost complete skull belonging to a new hominin called Zinjanthropus boisei. It wasn't a direct ancestor of us, but it was pretty close. It lived 1.75 million years ago. The most important discovery in the Olduvai Gorge was of the Homo habilis, a direct ancestor of Homo sapiens that lived 2 million years ago. It's thanks to the new fossilized remains here that scientists were able to theorize that right in the center of Tanzania, human life first emerged. The Pompei Bakery. The volcanic city of Pompeii in Italy is undoubtedly one of the greatest archaeological treasures we have. In the year 79, Mount Vesuvius erupted and blanketed the city of Pompeii and Herculaneum in hot ash. The result was that both cities were immaculately preserved, especially Pompeii. Archaeologists have a real Roman town preserved for them to study. It's been an incredible source of information about ordinary Roman life. Researchers have found the remains of slave quarters, marketplaces, expensive villas, and so much more. One of the most spectacular places discovered in Pompeii is an ancient bakery. The bakery is preserved so well that we can see how bread was made 2,000 years ago. The millstones are still standing, each one with a square socket designed to fit a wooden beam. The wooden beam would then be connected to a mule by a harness, and the mules would walk in a circle to grind grain into flour. Then grain would be collected on lead sheets and slipped into the brick oven. The oven, which is still in Pompeii right now, could fit enough raw material to cook 80 loaves of bread. It's an amazing place because when you think of ancient Rome, you likely think about colosseums, aqueducts, legions, and other impressive things. Nobody ever considers the simplicity of the Roman bakery, supplying bread to the entire empire. The lost city of Tanea. Archaeologists recently made some amazing discoveries in Greece. For centuries, nobody was really sure if the lost city of Tanea even existed. The city was mentioned in ancient Greek myths and old historical texts in connection with the legend of Oedipus. Oedipus was the mythical king of Thebes. According to legend, Oedipus took colonists from the city of Tanea and founded Syracuse on the island of Sicily. Records from the 2nd century AD show that the city was originally built by Trojan prisoners of war around 1100 BC. After the monumental defeat of Troy, a group of prisoners allegedly escaped and built their own city, which eventually became a Greek city. The existence of Tanea was finally confirmed in 1984, when villagers stumbled upon a sarcophagus. They were trying to dig a well, but instead found a coffin and human remains. Archaeologists soon got involved, and large-scale excavations in 2013 led to the uncovering of a massive city. Now, recent excavations have revealed even more structures and artifacts from the lost metropolis. Investigators found a large public building from the Roman age, a hidden cache of silver and copper coins, and Roman ceramics. They also found crumbling structures from the commercial center, what was once a bustling marketplace where all kinds of oddities could be purchased. Researchers also made some new discoveries in the cemetery. A Roman burial hidden in an underground chamber revealed a bronze coin from Athens from the 1st century BC and a lamp decorated with images of the god Ares. The burial contained the remains of a child in a grand tomb with a ceramic roof, though nobody has any idea who the kid was. The Temple in the Western Desert. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities recently announced the surprising discovery of a Greco-Roman temple in the middle of the Western Desert. Found amidst the sand dunes and dusty pathways of the Egyptian Sahara, 200 miles from the Mediterranean Sea, scientists uncovered the temple. It's at the site of Al-Salam and was likely in use when the landscape looked very different than it does today. Archaeologists revealed parts of its foundation, the main entrance, and a massive outer wall protecting an inner courtyard. It looks like a crummy ruin now, but 2,000 years ago it must have been quite the sight to behold. The temple is extremely remote, located near the Siwa Oasis. That's where Alexander the Great traveled 2,300 years ago to visit an oracle. The oracle revealed that Alexander was born to be the divine king of Egypt. As of now, the exact details of the temple are still foggy. We don't know if this was the site of another oracle, if it was dedicated to a certain god, or who even built it. Researchers say it was likely built around Alexander's conquest of Egypt in 332 BC, when the Persian occupation ended. This was the beginning of the Greco-Roman period, when the Greeks and Romans dominated Egypt, but its ancient religions and traditions continued to thrive.
Aizanoi. The ancient city of Aizanoi was founded by the Phrygians in Anatolia, Turkey, sometime between 1200 and 700 BC. Then, during the Hellenistic period, the city was controlled by both the Pergamon and Bithynia kingdoms. But like most cities around the Mediterranean, it came under Roman control around 133 BC. The city had a grand theater, a massive stadium, and a megalithic temple dedicated to Zeus. It was an amazing place with ties to the Greeks, Romans, and Byzantines, but for some unknown reason, history buried the city many centuries ago. It wasn't uncovered again until travelers came across its ruins in 1824. In 1926, the German Archaeological Institute started excavating. There was a brief pause until the 1970s, then another pause until the 2020s. Archaeologists are now hard at work trying to uncover the secrets of Aizanoi. And now, probably thanks to better tools and new technology, they're doing a very good job of it. They recently unearthed a collection of stone heads and headless bodies depicting a wide variety of Greek gods and goddesses. Statues of Aphrodite, Dionysus, Eros, and even Hercules. One of the more bizarre discoveries they've made is a giant man carved from solid stone. He was a whopping 9.8 feet tall, a massive creation even by Roman standards. As of right now, nobody is really sure who the giant was supposed to depict. If he was supposed to be a real giant, or a depiction of a god. The graffiti at Saqqara. Saqqara was used as a burial ground in ancient Egypt for thousands of years. It's the site of the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built 4,700 years before today. It's also the place where many important figures in Egyptian history were found entombed dozens of feet beneath the surface. But there is something else at Saqqara that most people don't know about. Not far from the famous pyramid is a small room with a layer of glass protecting a very old inscription. The inscription was left behind by a tourist who visited the pyramid 3,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest examples of graffiti in the world, scribbled on the wall around 1232 BC. The timeline here is pretty shocking if you think about it. The graffiti was left 1,500 years after the death of Djoser and the construction of his pyramid. To put that in perspective, 1,500 years is the time between now and the collapse of the Roman Empire. As for what the graffiti says, it's not as bad as you might think. The individual identifies themselves as a treasury scribe under the governing body of Pharaoh Ramses II. He simply wrote how much he admired the structures and the impressive pyramid still standing after so much time. Basically, he was saying, I was here. Javari Valley. The Javari Valley is a wilderness refuge for indigenous tribes deep in the Brazilian jungle. The valley is considered one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where rainforest tribes live in total isolation. Unfortunately, it's also a lawless hotspot for poachers, smugglers, cocaine traffickers, and illegal loggers. The valley is located in the far west of Brazil, covering a massive stretch of rainforest and inhospitable terrain. The only way to reach this place is by navigating winding rivers and skirting along the border of Peru. Even though the valley is supposed to be a sanctuary for indigenous tribes to live in peace away from the outside world, it's become a place of violence and a hub for illegal operations. Since the government stays out of it, indigenous people are often attacked and killed by people destroying the land and trying to make a profit. Scott Wallace, who wrote a book on uncontacted tribes in the Amazon, says the Javari Valley is where criminals act with impunity. It's about 33,000 square miles, roughly the size of Portugal, and is rich in natural resources and exotic animals. Because of its isolation, it's also the perfect place to move cocaine from one country to another. This makes it an ideal smuggling base for moving drugs between Brazil, Peru, and Colombia. To give you an idea of just how dangerous this section of the jungle is, many people who enter it go missing or die. For example, British journalist Dom Phillips went missing when he ventured into the Javari Valley and was never seen again. Dom was traveling through the valley with indigenous expert Bruno Pereira when he was gunned down by local fishermen. The fishermen later admitted to the murder on account of they didn't want to get in trouble for illegal fishing. It is a severe problem, and unfortunately, not that many people know about it. The Somali Piracy Zones. Somali pirates are still a real threat to this day. In fact, pirates are just as dangerous in 2022 as they were in the 17th century. In 2010, piracy in the Western Indian Ocean resulted in roughly $7 billion of lost profits. The International Maritime Bureau put together maps showing the areas where piracy was most dangerous. In 2008, there were a total of 293 pirate attacks, with almost half of them centered around Somalia. The waters of Somalia are considered some of the most dangerous on the planet, but the number of attacks changes dramatically from year to year. In 2009, there were 406 pirate attacks globally, and in 2010, that number rose to 445. Then it dropped in 2013 to only 264. The coast of Somalia isn't exactly forbidden, but it should be considered one of the most dangerous places if you have a big fancy boat. You don't want to be caught passing through on a sailboat or even a cargo ship, because you could find yourself the victim of angry pirates. Heard Island. Heard Island is an isolated and uninhabited chunk of land near Antarctica. It's in the southern Indian Ocean, roughly halfway between Australia and South Africa. It's been referred to as Australia's Hawaii, although very few people have ever stepped foot on its shores. It's covered in rolling mountains and snowy glaciers, and is only around 30 miles long. Its tallest summit is known as Big Ben, and it's an active volcano releasing an almost constant stream of hot smoke. Because Australia technically owns the island as one of their territories, that makes Big Ben Australia's highest peak at over 9,000 feet. Heard Island is one of the most remote islands in the entire world. It's a land of fire and ice, an active volcano sitting atop an island mostly covered in snow. Researchers say the island would be a lot bigger if it wasn't for the constant battle between the lava and the ice. Even though the volcano is constantly pushing out magma, that magma cools too quickly on the icy glaciers and then shatters instead of becoming solid ground. The only thing you're likely to hear while walking across the island is the gurgling of molten rock being pushed up through the core of the island. It's not totally forbidden to step foot on Heard Island, but it is almost impossible. Getting there is not easy, and even if you do manage to reach the island, there's a pretty good chance you'll never get off it. It's covered in deep crevices, and there is no help for thousands of miles. It's an inhospitable wasteland with winds that belong in a Category 3 cyclone, so good luck! Collie Hills. Collie Hills is home to one of the most dangerous drives on the planet. The only way up this mountain in India is by driving the Collie Hills Road, which features an unprecedented 70 hairpin turns. Messing up even one of those turns can result in a dramatic fiery crash. It's not uncommon for vehicles to go spiraling off the edge of the cliff at one of the bends, exploding in a fireball at the bottom of the jungle canopy below. They don't call it the Road of Death for nothing. The road is only 29 miles long, but every single mile is full of heart-stopping danger. That's why locals call it the Mountains of Death. The road is full of potholes. There are often bottlenecks where the road isn't wide enough for two vehicles to pass, and the whole thing is littered with waterfalls that can potentially wash out whole sections of road. The good news is that the view is spectacular. The views only get more and more beautiful as you creep higher up the mountain. But the higher you go, the more dangerous it gets. It's constantly full of traffic, and one wrong move can spell disaster. This is especially true in January, when the weather gets cold enough that the road turns into a gigantic slip and slide, making it even more treacherous. Big shout out to J-Locks and Simply Blessed. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Cape Tribulation. There was no real way to reach Cape Tribulation in Australia until 2002. And even then, the road was mostly unpaved and extremely treacherous. Its beaches are considered some of the most beautiful in the world, mostly because of their isolation and pristine condition. Because this place didn't even have a pathway until the 1960s, almost nobody has come here. The sand is white as snow, the mangroves lean against the shoreline, and the lush green mountains rise in the distance. The beaches are protected from devastating waves by the Great Barrier Reef beyond, making the water crystal clear and serene. It sounds like paradise, And yet Cape Tribulation is home to the most dangerous beaches in the world. You're not allowed to swim here, and you're not allowed to walk here either. Entrance is forbidden because of the dangerous wildlife. The calm and warm waters have attracted venomous sea jellies in mass numbers. The dangerous box jellyfish, the stonefish, and even cone snails flock here. If you so much as dip your big toe into the water, there's a chance you could get stung by a jellyfish and die. And that's not the only thing either. The fresh water pouring out from the Daintree River makes the entire coastline a haven for hungry saltwater crocodiles. It's such a volatile place, crocodiles have allegedly been witnessed fighting with great white sharks. And I haven't even mentioned the snakes, spiders, and even the dangerous plants that are trying to kill you. At Cape Tribulation, even the plants can leave you crying in agony. Granite Mountain. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has their very own vault built into the side of a mountain near Salt Lake City in Utah. The vault belongs to the Mormon Church, though it looks like something you would expect the United States military to build. But what exactly could the Mormon Church need a super-secret vault for? Well, it contains 3.5 billion images of family history records on roughly 2.4 million rolls of microfilm. That's what's hiding in the Mormon Church's vault on Granite Mountain. It's a storage vault meant to preserve the entire genealogical history of their followers. It's a secure facility containing the names of the deceased, buried underneath 700 feet of solid stone. The vault itself is 65,000 square feet, reinforced with 14-ton doors designed to withstand a nuclear blast. This is sort of the American version of the Vatican's secret archives. The Granite Mountain Vault does not only contain genealogical records, but it also holds important church materials. Officially, this includes everything from scriptures written in every published language to ancient religious texts, financial records, and so much more. There are some who believe the vault is also holding more mysterious things, such as the golden plates Joseph Smith found at the Hill Cumorah. For those unfamiliar with the Mormon faith, Joseph Smith was the one who discovered golden plates inscribed with everything he wrote down in the Book of Mormon. Smith discovered these plates near his home in Manchester, New York, on September 22, 1823. He claimed an angel named Moroni showed him where they were buried in a stone box, and he used the plates to create the Mormon's Bible. Those plates have never been confirmed as real artifacts, but some believe they are stashed in Granite Mountain. Woomera Range Complex. The largest military land base in the world is the Woomera Range Complex in Australia. It is positively massive. It was first established in 1947 at the behest of the British. They needed a place to test atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. And since Britain is so small, they looked to their friends in Australia for help. This was mostly motivated because of what Germany was doing in World War II. The United Kingdom was desperate to do its own rocket testing, and so they chose a remote piece of land in South Australia to make it happen. The test site is roughly the size of Louisiana. It's 49,000 square miles and is still active right now. It's a fully closed base and off limits to outsiders. For that reason, we don't really know what goes on inside the perimeter fence. It's supposedly used for testing drones, explosives, new weapon systems, and rockets. But as with most major military bases, the real action is kept a secret. Oddly enough, there are some civilians allowed on the base. The land has been rented out with special permits for gold mining. The land is completely prohibited unless you're digging for gold. In that case, the military evacuates the families who are mining the land to special bomb shelters whenever they are testing something new and dangerous. Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is an ancient Islamic shrine built in 691 AD. This makes it one of the oldest Islamic buildings in the world. It's also one of the most forbidden places on the planet. It's located at the very top of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a spot sacred to Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims. These are the three main Abrahamic religions, and yet despite the majestic Islamic temple being at one of the holiest sites in the world for so many years, nobody except for those of the Muslim faith are allowed inside. The rock at the top of the Temple Mount is incredibly important for a lot of reasons. According to the Jewish Talmud, The rock was where God gathered earth to create Adam. It was also upon this rock that Cain, Abel, and Noah each made their sacrifice to God. Muslims believe the rock was where Muhammad ascended to heaven with the angel Gabriel, as is written in the Quran. In the 60s, some non-Muslims were allowed entry to the site, but after Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visited in 2000, Muslims rioted, and once again the compound was closed to visitors. The Cyprus Buffer Zone. Almost 50 years ago, the Cyprus National Guard staged a coup that led to an escalation in the civil war between the Greek and Turkish communities living on the island. There was blood and anarchy, followed by a ceasefire and the creation of a heavily monitored buffer zone, one which was controlled by the United Nations. It was established in 1964 and then extended in 1974. The buffer zone is 112 miles across the island and 4.6 miles wide. It's also 100% forbidden. Nobody is allowed inside the buffer zone, even all these years later. The Cyprus buffer zone is a lot like the DMZ separating North Korea and South Korea, except in Cyprus, this no man's land is filled with abandoned structures. There's the abandoned Nicosia International Airport that's little more than a ruin. Cafes, businesses, houses, and entire communities were abandoned and then forsaken. It's a strange and eerie snapshot of 1960s Cyprus before the Turkish invasion. The city of Nicosia, through which the buffer zone goes, has been the only divided European capital since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Many parts have remained completely untouched by humans. They are now ecological safe zones, with unique flora and fauna flourishing without human intervention. Forbidden Ethiopian Church. According to the Bible, Moses stashed the tablets containing the 10 Commandments inside a wooden chest covered in gold. This artifact became known as the Ark of the Covenant, and it is one of the greatest historical and archaeological mysteries in the world. The Bible tells us the Ark was kept at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem up until around 586 BC. This was when Jerusalem was attacked and destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, and since then, the Ark has been missing. Some say it was stolen by the Knights Templar and hidden deep underneath a mysterious French cathedral. Others say it's hiding inside Alexander the Great's tomb, wherever that might be. Ethiopians believe the Ark of the Covenant is in the northern city of Aksum, the ancient capital of the Aksumite Empire and the throne of Queen Sheba. They believe the artifact is held inside the Church of St. Mary of Zion. The reason I mention this is because the Church of St. Mary of Zion is one of the most forbidden places of all time. The Ark supposedly made it here in the 10th century BC, stolen by Menelik, son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. It's such a dangerous relic that it could only be moved while covered, and nobody was ever allowed to look upon it. It was stashed inside the Chapel of the Tablet and has been there ever since. Nobody is allowed inside the chapel to see it except for a single guardian. The guardian is charged with watching over the Ark for his entire life. Nobody else, not even the high priest of Aksum, can enter the chamber where the Ark is held. Thanks for watching. If you could visit one of these dangerous and forbidden places, which would you choose? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!